Okay, hello. So, what I have decided to do is I'm going to read one chapter from a few different books. And then I want everyone to comment, please. And you tell me which one has piqued your interest the most. And the one that gets the most comments is the one that I will continue reading. Okay? That seems fair. So, we are going to begin a chapter in Daughter of Empire Life as a Mountbatten. Now, just because one gets more comments doesn't mean that I'm not going to do the other one. It's going to change the where they sit in the list, right? All right, so let's start with chapter 1. My father could trace his roots back to the 9th century. Through 41 generations, he was able to recount the lives of our ancestors, royalists, rebels, and saints. He never tired of telling me that it was extremely rare for a family to be able to cite two canonized antecedents. The first, he would say proudly, goes way back to the 13th century. Saint Elizabeth of Hungary was a gracious princess who secretly gave alms to the poor. Her husband didn't approve of this, and one morning ordered her to remove the cover of her basket. And I love the ending of this story. Her forbidden bread had miraculously turned into roses. The other was your great aunt Ella, the Grand Duchess of Russia, who, following her husband's assassination, became a nun and worked tirelessly among the poor and sick of Moscow. In 1918, when she, the chief nun, three young princes, a Grand Duke, and a lady-in-waiting, were thrown down in a mine shaft by the Bolsheviks, along with a few hand grenades for good measure, witnesses heard her clear, sweet voice singing Hail, Gentle Light, and other hymns of fortitude to her fellow victims. Before she died, she tore up her nun's veil to provide bandages for the prince's wounds. I don't know if you can hear that. Something's going on around here. Now known as Saint Elizabeth of I'm so sorry, my brain is glitching. Romanova. Sorry. Every once in a while, I don't know if it's dyslexia, what it is, but my brain will really struggle to pronounce a word, even if I've seen it a million times. My great aunt is one of 12 modern saints preserved in sculpture above the west door of Westminster Abbey. It was hard to keep track of my father's long line of relatives, but as he loved lists and charts and stories, he was always ready to bring them to life. For many generations, his ancestors had been rulers of the Grand Duchy of Hesse in Germany, a landlocked territory far from the coast. It was his father, Prince Louis Alexander of Battenberg, who changed all that and altered the course of the family's path. In 1868, at the tender age of 14, beset by dreams of a seafaring life, he surprised everyone by announcing that he was leaving home to set sail. In fact, he was so determined to become part of the greatest navy in the world that he took British citizenship, eventually rising to the top job of First Sea Lord and Admiral of the Fleet. He didn't cut off his ties with Europe completely, though, falling in love with his cousin, Princess Victoria of Hesse, a sparky, independent-minded granddaughter of Queen Victoria, who was related to most of the royal courts in Europe. In those days, it wasn't always an advantage to have family members scattered across Europe, and during the First World War, his mother found herself on opposite sides to her brother and sister. Luckily, my father always said, while patriotism was intense, it never undermined strong family affections. My grandparents married in 1888 and lived variously in England, Germany, and Malta. My father, also Prince Louis of Battenberg, but known as Dicky, was born in 1900, the youngest of 4 children. The aging Queen Victoria held him at his christening, and he wriggled so much that he got her full square in the face with a fist and a foot, knocking off her spectacles. He always told me that at only a few weeks old he couldn't possibly have known he was to be seen and not heard while in the Queen's arms. My father was blessed with enlightened parents. His mother in particular thought that children should not only be seen and very much heard, but that they should also be exposed to new ideas and the classics. She kept meticulous records of the books she read and was always keen to try new experiences. Passionate about cartography, she worked for many years on a detailed geological map of Malta, participated in archaeological digs, and, rather daringly, scooping up my father to provide the extra required weight, flew in a Zeppelin airship and a very early model of a biplane, even though as she said, it was not made to carry passengers, and we perched securely on a little stool holding on to the flyer's back. Coming from a line of progressive thinkers, she taught my father herself until he was 10 years old, gifting him an education that was thorough and polymathic. She taught him to be open-minded, methodical, and thorough, and above all encouraged him to enjoy learning, to inquire. Later, when I got to know my grandmother, I could see how entirely free of prejudice she was, how interested she was in all that was around her, and just how much of an influence she had had on my father's refreshing way of viewing the world. She was to be an inspiring force in my life. A month before his 10th birthday, my father was sent to Lockers Park Prep School in Herefordshire, and 2 years later, he entered the Royal Naval College at Osborne. As war became inevitable at the beginning of 1914, his German-born father was forced to retire from the Admiralty as First Sea Lord because of the anti-German hysteria at large in the country, scurrilous newspaper headlines whipping people into a frenzy of hatred. My grandfather resigned, even though the Navy was solidly behind him, and this episode had a profound effect on my father, who vowed to succeed to the position of his wronged father. Then, during the war, when King George V decreed the royal family should anglicize their name, choosing Windsor, my grandfather changed his from Battenberg to Mountbatten. The king created him the Marquis of Milford Haven, having offered him the title of Duke, but, practical to the last, and looking around him at the grandeur of the English nobility, he calculated that as his savings had been decimated in the German economic downturn, he simply didn't have the wealth that would be expected of him with that rank. An English duke had to maintain a grand lifestyle. My father also ceased to be the younger Prince Louis of Battenberg and received the courtesy title of Lord Louis Mountbatten. During the First World War, my father joined Lord Beatty's flagship, HMS Lion, as a midshipman, and later he was appointed first lieutenant of a small ship, HMS P-31, and for a long time, aged only 18, he found himself in command of a crew of 60. Wow. Through Princess Mary, I don't know what is wrong with me, I must be excited. Through Princess Mary, my father contrived that King George V should come on board during the peace pageant on the Thames. He saluted smartly as the monarch came aboard. "Hello, Dickie," said the king jovially. "How's Chicken Bella?" The fact that his sovereign remembered the stupid doll he had had as a 2-year-old mortified the 19-year-old second-in-command and exposed him to remorseless teasing. "How's Chicken Bella?" Oh my goodness. The Admiralty now sent the war babies who had been unable to complete their education to Cambridge University, and my father went with both Prince Albert and Prince Henry. They all led a wildly social life, falling in and out of love between studying. Tall, with the good looks of a Hollywood film star, my father was very much in demand. He was also in demand from the royal household, accompanying the Prince of Wales, the future King Edward VIII, and as his personal aide-de-camp, on tours including Australia and later India and Japan. Grace Kelly once confided that she had always kept a photograph of my father before she met Prince Rainier. Mrs. Cornelius Vanderbilt, a fiercely rich American society hostess, nicknamed the Kingfisher for her relentless cultivation of European royalty, singled my father out as the perfect suitor for her only daughter. When she invited him to a tea party in her yacht off Cowes, my father was immediately smitten, falling helplessly in love at first sight. Only it wasn't quite as Mr. Vanderbilt had intended, for on board that afternoon was a gathering of young ladies, including Edwina Ashley, an effortlessly glamorous heiress, who had recently learned to stand with her hips pushed slightly forward, the very image of beau monde chic. With one hand on her slender hip, the charms of her gold bracelet glinting off the other in the sun, my father was at once dazzled and delighted. Although they had met a couple times previously, they began to court in earnest, and when my father went to India with the prince, Edwina followed him, staying at the Vice-Regal Lodge. It became obvious to all that they were very much in love, so much so that the Prince of Wales lent them his sitting rooms so that my father could propose. On 18 July 1922, they were married in St. Margaret's, Westminster, tucked in the shadow of Westminster Abbey on Parliament Square. It was the most talked about society wedding of the year, and when my mother walked out on the arm of her dashing husband beneath a naval arch of swords, they were congratulated by a host of royals, including King George V, Queen Mary, and the Queen Mother, Alexandra. At the sumptuous reception, the Prince of Wales gave the best man speech, following which my parents enjoyed a rather protracted honeymoon, traveling to France, Spain, Germany, and the States, where they stayed with Hollywood's royalty, the king and queen of silent movies, Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks. They even made a short silent home movie with Charlie Chaplin entitled Nice and Easy, in which Charlie played a rogue trying to steal the pearls of the heroine, my mother, who was rescued by her lover, my father. I am going to look that up, and if I can find it, I'll post it. My mother's performance showed suitable girlish alarm. My father's acting was dreadful, and of course Charlie stole the show. Happily exhausted, they returned to Manhattan for the last few days of their adventure, where they stayed as guests of the very game Mrs. Cornelius Vanderbilt, who bore no grudges. Marriage, my father's love and sense of her own destiny. This is what my mother needed. Since her coming out, she had been living with her grandfather, Sir Ernest Cassel, in his London home, Brooke House, stoically hosting his large parties of elderly grandees and financiers, but his death in the year before her marriage had left my mother feeling empty, memories of her lonely childhood flooding back to her. Raised by a series of nannies and housekeepers in Broadlands, a large Palladian mansion near Romsey in Hampshire, Edwina and her younger sister Mary were mostly kept apart from their parents. Her mother, Maudie, suffered from consumption, and, as her condition deteriorated, she spent more and more time away, particularly in Egypt. Their father, Wilfred, a Conservative MP, was rarely at home either, busy attending to his political duties. My mother's early letters show how anxious she was to see her darling mother again. Having been misled by a well-intentioned suggestion from their governess, my mother believed that the reason for their separation was that she was going to be a sister again, and she wrote to her mother at least twice, expressing her and Mary's desire to have a little brother. After a while, the penny dropped, and she tried to keep the desperation out of her letters, going out of her way to keep her tone upbeat. When Maudie finally returned to Broadlands, it was thought too upsetting for the children to witness their mother's failing health, so they were sent away to a cousin. And even though my mother wrote several times with growing urgency and despair, pleading to see her mother again, she was never allowed to, and Maudie died in February 1911. My mother and Mary did not attend the funeral. My mother was brave, hiding her emotions well, containing her sister, who became very difficult, throwing tantrums and creating scenes. It seemed that she was the only one who could calm Mary down, and forever after she felt responsible for her younger sister's safety and well-being. A subdued period of existence followed, during which time the girls learned to pour their bruised feelings into caring for the menagerie of domestic pets: puppies, ponies, rabbits, kittens, and a goat. For a brief while their lives were cheered and enriched by the arrival of Laura de Vera, a loving young governess, to whom the sisters became deeply attached. But just as they began to settle down and come out of their protective shells, their father presented them with a new stepmother, and the world came crashing down again. Molly Forbes Semple replaced their beloved Miss de Vera with a governess of her choice, and sent the girls to bed every evening by 6:30, so that they were out of the way, a phrase that deeply upset my mother. My mother and aunt were forbidden to pick a single flower from the garden from the moment she moved in, and Broadlands became a sterile and difficult place in which to live. Eventually, my mother went to school near Eastbourne, another lonely place for her, where the pupils took it in turns hooking up Miss Potts, a humiliating task involving wrestling with endless hooks and buttons in order to help the headmistress secure her dress each morning. That's weird. Things improved little more when, aged 18, my mother was sent to a domestic science training college. It was here that she vowed never to go back and live at Broadlands while her stepmother was alive. On leaving, she went to live in London with her grandfather, Sir Ernest. Life changed for the better when she met my father. They had both been recently touched by death. My father, distraught at the loss of his father, my mother by the unexpected death of her grandfather, and initially they sought solace in each other. As time passed, however, and finally freed from her past, rich from her inheritance, which included Brooke House, and happily in love, my mother found life opening up to her. This was the beginning of the Roaring Twenties, a time of exuberance and great optimism, jazz, dance, and liberating new styles. My mother was fashionably slender. She referred to herself as a straight actress, with vital statistics of 26 all the way down. Good grief, she's just like a board. She took full advantage of the freedom afforded to women now that bustles and corsets were obstructions from the past. She soon cut her hair short a la mode, and kept it immaculately coiffed. As hemlines rose and shoes became more prominent, my mother had hers handmade in Paris, a pair in every color. This was the extravagant time in my parents' lives. They had a cinema screen installed in Brooke House and hosted regular parties at which princes, even kings and queens, could rub shoulders with the likes of Noel Coward, Cole Porter, and George Gershwin. By playing it at her parties, my mother made The Man I Love an overnight hit in England after Gershwin told her how upset he was that it had flopped in the U.S. She danced the Charleston with Fred Astaire, and the rumors that Queen Mary didn't approve of this kind of behavior made the dancing all the more delicious. If they weren't entertaining at home, my parents went out to clubs, and it was only when they arrived that the party really got started. Once they had danced into the early hours, they would return to Brooke House, music ringing in their ears, and collapse into bed. As was the fashion in those days, they kept separate bedrooms. My father's decorated to look like a ship's cabin, a porthole in the wall with an ingenious view of Malta built behind. He had designed the light switch himself so that when turned down it emitted a low hum like that of a ship's engine, and this helped him get to sleep. The walls were pale green and the carpet black, and the bed was covered in a thick orange cotton quilt hand-woven in Malta. This much I know because it would be the same wherever we lived thereafter. My mother slept next door between pink satin sheets with a swan's down quilt covered in pink ostrich feathers so that it appeared to float. During the first months of their marriage, while my father was waiting for the completion of the ship to which he had been assigned, he and my mother continued to enjoy a busy social life, playing golf, lunching with friends, partying in the evenings. On the weekends, they would escape to Adsdean, a rented house not far from Portsmouth, where they would entertain friends, take walks in the country, and show off their rather exotic collection of animals, which over time came to include a lion cub, 2 wallabies, a bush baby, and a coatimundi, a kind of anteater named Schnozzle. Being rich and lavish in their hospitality in both town and country meant that they depended on a large body of staff, the majority of whom traveled up and down between London and Sussex in the staff bus. They were certainly kept busy, seeing to the needs of the various guests, some of whom visited as often as my parents. Peter Murphy was a particular favorite, bringing laughter and fun into any room he entered. Peter ran a left-wing bookshop, and once gave my mother a book on raising children that she never picked up, but which my father devoured and tried to follow to the best of his abilities. Peter's jacket and trouser pockets were always stuffed with newspaper and periodical cuttings that he would dish out to relevant recipients as if they were sweets. He was a brilliant thinker, engaging my parents and their various guests in pithy debates. He spoke several languages fluently, was famed for his hilarious mimicry, and could play any tune on the piano by ear. Another regular visitor was Paula Long. She was a great beauty, painted by Augustus John, and much photographed by Cecil Beaton. In the 1920s, she wore white face powder, and any dab's delight worth his salt wanted to be seen to have white powder on his jacket shoulder, a sign that he had danced with her. Her married life was turbulent, and she had an assortment of husbands. The Marquis de Casa Maury, a racing driver and founder of the Curzon Cinema, with whom she led a very social life, Bill Allen, a keen backpacker with whom she trekked across Europe, and Boy Long, a tea planter in Kenya, where she lived in the world of the Happy Valley set. That's a wild life. Later, when my mother became serious and put these days behind her, Paula was the only friend she kept from this wild period of her life. As time went on, my father's naval duties often took him away from my mother. She was bored alone, her childhood demons coming to haunt her, and so became increasingly reliant on her loyal ginks, or admirers for entertainment. She began to collect young men in a way that raised many eyebrows. Now that she had control over her life, this kind of chase became exciting. Of course, the ramifications were messy and complex. When my father first heard that my mother had taken a lover, he was devastated. But eventually, using their reserves of deep mutual affection, my parents managed to negotiate a way through this crisis and found a modus vivendi. On a lighter note, my mother's social life presented the staff with its own problems. Brooke House was large, but even it could not provide enough rooms to ensure that no young man was aware of the others. When my mother returned from shopping one day, she was met with Mr. Larry Gray is in the drawing room, Mr. Sanford is in the library, Mr. Ted Phillips is in the boudoir, Signor Portago in the anteroom, and I don't know what to do with Mr. Molyneux. Hold on. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are all there at the same time? It was my father's complete lack of jealousy and total desire for my mother's happiness that made their marriage work. Okay. My mother longed to see the world. From an early age, possibly symptomatic of a repressed desire to flee her childhood, she had slept with a pocket atlas by her bed. So when my father's job afforded her the opportunity to travel, she caught the bug. From then on, she was often away for long periods of time, and for a while was not in England for more than a few weeks at a time. Even in 1924, when my sister Patricia was born, she partied in the south of France, leaving her baby daughter at home at just a month old. It seemed that she couldn't stop herself indulging in this hedonistic way of life, the endless adventure and travel that so thrilled her. Fortunately, my father was devoted to his new baby daughter from the moment she was born, a bond that was to last a lifetime and one that would extend to include me. Oh dear. My birth caused a great deal of trouble. When my father's tour of naval duty in Malta came to an end, my parents and 2 naval friends set off for 5 days in Morocco. My mother, normally so sprightly, was pregnant with me, although it hardly showed. When my father asked for his C&C for some time off, he was told, "Pull the other one, Dickie. Don't try that old sailor's excuse with me. I only danced with your wife last night." So her pregnancy was so, what's it called? Subtle. Like, I knew one woman like this in my whole life. If you didn't know her, you wouldn't know she was pregnant. I don't know where she carried that baby. She was so tiny. I don't even know how there was a baby in there. It was wild. From Morocco, they crossed to Gibraltar so my father could return to his ship, HMS Revenge, for combined maneuvers of the Mediterranean and Atlantic fleets. Never one to miss out. My mother had made plans for the time he was away. The chauffeur had driven her beloved Hispano Suiza H6 from England, and, roaring out of town in the front seat in a neat cloche hat, dark sunglasses, flawlessly rouged lips, and bright red nails, she felt on top of the world. As I climbed the mountains toward Malaga, however, the twists and turns left my mother feeling sick and exhausted, as did the train journeys onward through to Madrid and Barcelona. Finally making her weary way to the polo club to meet up with my father, who had come to join her and play in a tournament, she was all but finished off. After the match, my parents went straight to their suite at the Ritz. In the early hours of Friday, 19 April 1929, my mother awoke with severe contractions. I was on my way. Despite my father's best efforts, the hotel could only find an ear, nose, and throat specialist to help them. In desperation, my father telephoned his cousin, Queen Edna, in Madrid. She was away, but King Alfonso answered. "We're having a baby." "We're having a baby," exclaimed my father. The king, a great womanizer, got the wrong end of the stick and replied, "Oh, my dear Dickie, I won't tell anyone." "Tell everyone," implored my father. "It's my wife. Edwina's having the baby." "Leave everything to me," said the king, and rang off. Within half an hour, the royal guard had the hotel surrounded. In the meantime, a doctor had been found and dispatched to the local hospital to secure the necessary equipment, and an English nurse who appeared like an angel and administered chloroform to deaden the pain my mother was experiencing. Downstairs, the doctor had returned from the hospital with an ominously large bag, but he rushed with such steely determination towards the entrance of the hotel that he was promptly arrested by the royal guards. My mother was by now hemorrhaging, so was unaware of the events that began to unfold beyond the hotel walls with the slapstick absurdity of one of my father's favorite Buster Keaton movies. As the commotion in and around the hotel reached fever pitch, in Nice, my parents' great friend Peter Murphy had been roused at dawn by my father's anguished phone call. He grabbed his driver and set off immediately. They drove nonstop for 24 hours, Peter telling endless stories to keep his driver awake, something that eventually began to tax even his brilliant skills. Not to mention his driver's ability to remain attentive for so long. In the early hours of the morning, Peter and his driver finally entered Barcelona at such speed that they crashed, yards from the hotel, into a tram. Panting and bleeding, Peter hot-footed it up the stairs of the Ritz and burst into the room, shaken but triumphant. As heads turned away from my mother, someone shouted at him to get off the carpet. Then all eyes turned back to me. I had arrived safely, and was wrapped in a beautifully embroidered layette that had been brought in by some local nuns. I lay in a crib made from a little dog basket, a solitary, happy presence, blissfully unaware of the noise and tumult of the family life into which I had just been delivered. Well, I think this is fun. But I'm going to stop there. That's the end of chapter 1. And then I'm going to move on to chapter 1 of Matriarch. And I know this is like maybe it's a little funky, but I just don't want to make a million videos today and have everyone's alerts going off. And, I don't want to drive people crazy. So once I know which one, then I can chop up this video and then I will repost like just the first one so that, if I can put it in a playlist, and if you want to go back and re-listen, you don't have to listen to the entire, right? Okay. Now, let's do Royal Service, which is the one by Charles's valet. This is kind of fun. It's like a little bit of everything. All right. It's like a little introduction. Every time I met people, both in England and around the world, as I traveled with Prince Charles, and just for the record, this was published in 1983. During my years of service at Buckingham Palace, one of the first questions invariably was, what are they really like? And I must admit, even in 1983, Prince Charles and the British royal family still retain a unique mystique. But despite the eyes of the world always on them, they are still very private people. When it was announced that I was leaving the palace after 12 years of royal service with the Prince of Wales, I received many letters and telephone calls from the media, asking for interviews and making offers for stories about my life with Prince Charles. This used to amuse him a lot. "What's the latest offer, Stephen?" he'd ask. And when I showed him the letter, he would gasp, "As much as that?" in an amazed tone. One day he turned to me and grinned. "How much do you suppose they'd pay me if I wrote about my 12 years with you?" Working for the prince was a marvelous experience, as you will see when you read on. All right, chapter 1, The Wedding. When I went into Prince Charles's bedroom to wake him on the morning of July 29, 1981, I found there was no need. For the first time I could remember in 12 years of calling Prince Charles, he was already lying there wide awake. I went to run his bath, and as usual, I turned on the radio. Already the pre-wedding program had begun. The prince was excited, yet he wasn't nervous at all. The build-up had been enormous, but as the future King of England, he had been preparing for this moment all his life. Outside in the mall, we could hear the sound of the curious crowds and see them waving banners. The slightest motion of the curtains in the windows of the palace was all that was needed for everyone out there to cheer and shout. Prince Charles bathed, dressed in a pair of cords and a shirt, and ate breakfast leisurely, and at 9:30 managed to find some time to say goodbye to Paul Officer, his longtime policeman companion who was leaving. In his rooms, the atmosphere was one of complete calm. He could not have been more relaxed. By 10:20, I had him dressed in his naval uniform and ready for the carriage ride to St. Paul's and his bride. He turned from the mirror and said, "It's been a long time, but at last. Thank you for all you've done, Stephen." "Thank you, sir," I said. It was nearly time to leave. "Is everything ready for Broadlands?" he wanted to know. The newlyweds were to spend the first 2 days of their honeymoon at the home of Lord Mountbatten, who had been Charles's godfather and almost a grandfather to him. "Everything's under control," I told him. "Good." He was quiet for a moment and then said, "How are you getting to St. Paul's?" "I'll follow you, sir," I said. He laughed. "Let's hope we don't both get lost." I walked downstairs with the prince and then out to the crowded grand entrance of the palace. The entrance isn't visible from the mall. Prince Andrew was already waiting in the hall, and the Queen and Prince Philip were about to leave for St. Paul's. All the staff who were not going to the cathedral filled the entrance, waiting to wave everyone off. They clapped when the prince came down the stairs, then cheered as his carriage drove away. I then ran through the bow room, the main room leading to the garden, and jumped into a waiting car at the garden entrance steps. As we drove off on the shorter route along the embankment to St. Paul's, all the way I could hear the crowds cheering and clapping as the procession went by. The master of the household was in the car with me. I remembered all those years ago when his predecessor had employed me, such a long time ago. "Well, it's finally happened, Stephen," he said. "We can only hope they'll be very happy." All I could think was who would have guessed the previous summer at Cowes that today we would sit in St. Paul's Cathedral watching the prince marry Lady Diana so short a time after they met. I took my seat in the cathedral before the prince had arrived, as there was nothing for me to do at this point. Lady Diana, of course, had her hairdresser and makeup girl waiting, but the royal men do not, as it is sometimes believed, wear any makeup on state occasions. In fact, they don't need to, as they all seem to have perfect skins. The prince will not even put on any makeup for a photographic session, and I can remember how amazed he was at the way Princess Anne looked at her wedding. "She's far too made up," he said when he saw her. There can be few people in Britain, or for that matter in much of the rest of the world, who did not see the prince's wedding ceremony on TV, but actually being there was something extraordinarily special. St. Paul's was bathed in light, magnificent flowers abounded everywhere, and gorgeous music soared to the cathedral dome. Everyone craned his neck to recognize everyone else, which somehow made it like the sort of wedding any large family might have. The ride back to the palace in the procession after the service with the rest of the guests was an unbelievable experience. From the car where I sat with the prince's household, I could see a sea of faces, smiling, happy faces. The sun was shining fitfully, brightening, waving flags. We could hear cheers, an incredible noise, and were aware that the crowd was trying to identify who we were. They didn't seem disappointed that we weren't anyone in particular. That day, I think the people would have cheered anything. The car dropped us at the Privy Purse entrance to the palace, and we went to the forecourt for a very privileged view of the balcony scene. As we shared the sight of the prince kissing the princess with the handicapped people whom the prince had requested be looked after in the courtyard, I was deeply aware of watching a slice of history. The wedding breakfast back at the palace was a family affair. None of the household went, but we had our own special lunches in the palace. Then the prince and his new princess came upstairs to change before they set off in the royal coach for Waterloo and the start of their honeymoon. Briefly, they each went their own ways, she to change in her own little suite with her mother to help her, while I was waiting to assist the prince in his own bachelor rooms. "Did you see this service properly?" he asked as I put his naval uniform back on its hanger. "I had a splendid view. It was absolutely wonderful," I said. "Did you enjoy Kiri T. Kanawa?" "Oh, yes. Oh, I have a record of her. She's an opera singer. I think, is she Hawaiian or she's Indonesian, I think. Or is she Filipino? I can't remember. I think I have her doing, I think it's Christmas. I think she does Messiah. Beautiful." I could only hear her," he said. I was signing the register at the time. I'd put out his favorite gray pinstripe suit and a fresh shirt, and he changed quickly, talking all the time he was dressing. "I'm so pleased it went so well," he said. "Did you think it went well?" What a question! Outside, the people were still calling for him and the princess. He then went to his study to pack up the papers he wanted to take with him. Even on honeymoon, his royal work would not cease. He peeped through the curtains. There was a man out there who had painted his head like a Union Jack, he said. Incredible! He was genuinely full of wonder at the people's response. "Are they never going home?" he said, amazed. "I can't believe it." He turned away from the window. "Are you coming to see me off?" "Yes, sir," I told him. "I'll be down in the quadrangle with everyone else." "I didn't mean that," he said. "Come to the station." Times had changed. This time he ran down the corridor. He runs everywhere. To collect the princess from her rooms, while I rushed downstairs with his briefcase to the rolls. Again, Sir John Miller, the Crown equerry, and I followed them through the cheering crowds to Waterloo Station, where the royal couple were setting off for Broadlands. The atmosphere at Waterloo was very informal. The princess impulsively kissed several people, and just before they got on the train, the prince said, "Thanks for everything, Stephen. I'll see you on Saturday at the airport." "I'll be there, sir," I said. That Saturday I was to join up with them again for the honeymoon. The prince had graciously asked his old team to accompany him. The group included John McLean, his policeman, his equerry, John Winter, me, and the princess's maid and newly acquired policeman, Graham Smith. It was a special thank you to us for all the extra work over the past months. I drove back to the palace through the streets where people were slowly drifting away, streets which were still colorful with bright papers, Union Jacks, the debris of an all-out London celebration. Street sweepers were cleaning, and when we arrived at the palace, one of the footmen came up to me. "There's something for you in the kitchen," he said. I had no idea what it was, but went to find out. There was a small bottle of champagne. It was from the prince. Okay, and that is chapter 1 of Royal Service, My 12 Years as Valet to Prince Charles by Stephen Barry. Now I'm just going to press pause and grab another one, and we will continue our little soupçon, our little buffet. Okay, so we are going to continue with The Private Lives of Winston Churchill, which is all about his personal life, obviously, his family life. It's it's a psychological, when it came out, it was presented as a psychological study of Winston Churchill. And so it's not all about, he did this and then he had this and then he did this. It's more about like what's going on in his mind, who's he surrounded by, what's going on. So I've been wanting to read this for a while, so this feels like a little treat for me. All right, chapter 1 is entitled Fathers, Sons, and Others. May 28, 1932, was a red-letter day in the private life of Winston Churchill. It was the day his son, Randolph, came of age, and since nothing was too good for his golden son and heir, the great man made elaborate preparations, which he could ill afford, to mark this important rite of passage. Churchill was particularly proud of his handsome son's appearance, and the birthday portrait commissioned from Sir Philip Laszlo, the most accomplished and expensive royal portrait painter of the day, bears melancholy witness to the brief beauty of Churchill's Dauphin. The profile is flawless, the brow regal, and the gaze from the bright blue eyes remarkably assured. Laszlo specialized in princes, and this was a portrait of a modern prince who took his inheritance for granted. The celebration Churchill was planning in Randolph's honor consisted of an elaborate and unusual dinner party to be held at Claridge's Hotel 2.5 weeks after Randolph's actual birthday. In Churchill's eyes, young Randolph was no ordinary 21-year-old, but the heir to a great tradition, a young man of whom great things might be expected. To express this, Churchill himself devised the evening's theme. Over 70 invitations were sent out for the all-male evening, apart from a few close friends, such as Robert Boothby, Sir Oswald Mosley, soon busily leading the British Union of Fascists, and Churchill's own scientific guru, Professor Frederick Lindemann. The guests were to consist of great men and their sons: Max Lord Beaverbrook with little Max Aiken, Lord Rothermere with the urbane Esmond Harmsworth, Lord Camrose with Seymour Barry, Lord Hailsham with Quinton Hogg, and Lord Reading with young Lord Early. Hi. Timmy just woke up and came. Oh, hi, baby. The good baby. Oh, he was sleeping over there. He just ran over and flopped down beside me. Oh. One noted absentee was Stanley Baldwin, the former and future Conservative Prime Minister, who had been invited with his left-wing son Oliver. Relations between Churchill and the elder Baldwin had become strained since Baldwin joined Labour Prime Minister Ramsay MacDonald in a national government the year before, leaving Churchill in the political wilderness. The Baldwins had declined the invitation. The Churchills, being Churchills, made the most of the advance publicity, which the presence of 3 famous press lords and their children in no way diminished. Randolph personally telephoned the Londoner's diary of Lord Beaverbrook's Evening Standard with advance details of his birthday. The diary, at the time, was edited by the dissolute but well-connected former spy and flunky of the rich, Sir Robert Bruce Lockhart. That evening, having composed an appropriately servile piece about the party based on Randolph's information, Sir Robert pondered the event in his private journal. What an amazing thing privilege and position still are in England. Here is a boy who, born in a less privileged circle, would have had to work hard and make his own way. As it is, he is lazy, lascivious, impudent, and beyond a certain rollicking bumptiousness, untalented, and everything is open to him. In fact, the tragedy of Randolph Churchill's life was that everything was not open to him. And it is interesting to note that of all the sons of that privileged circle who sat down to roast duck and champagne at Claridge's on that evening of June 16, 1932, only one, Quinton Hogg, lawyer, Tory politician, and future Lord Chancellor himself, would in any way approach his famous father's reputation and achievement. Stop that. Stop that. None would fail so painfully and in so many ways as Randolph Churchill. Few great men in recent history could have created such a scourge for themselves as doting Winston did with his beloved son, and few great men's sons, as loyal and loving as Randolph would remain toward his father, could have endured such desperate disappointments from their situation. He's such a stinker that sometimes it's like as soon as you get your camera to take a picture, it's too late. But I'm going to try my best, and I sure hope it's not in selfie mode. Oh, I disturbed him, but I got the picture. Hold on. He's curled up. He's curled up by his little blankie. And you can see where he's, it's actually a towel, but he doesn't know. And you can see where he's chewed on the little bit of trim. But, oh, sorry, the light is so awful. I know it's hard to see, but can you see his little bunny head? His little, oh, where can I go where the light won't be so bad? Okay, that's a little better. His little nose, his eyes closed, and his ear. Okay. Distractible. Oh, you're so precious. Okay, could have endured such desperate disappointment from their situation. Luckily for all those confident young men and famous fathers sitting so convivially together on that June night in their private room at Claridge's, all this lay safely in the future. Reassured by the general bonhomie and a generous supply of Churchill's favorite champagne, in 1928 he had bought up all available stock of Paul Roger champagne in London. That's probably not how you pronounce it, but I don't know. Roger? No one seemed particularly concerned about tempting fate. Churchill himself, always at his best in congenial male company, was as sparkling as his favorite drink, as he enlarged upon the evening's theme, passing on the lamp from one generation to the next. Referring to his precious son's prospects as a politician, Churchill spoke proudly of his verbal fluency, which he compared, in vintage Churchill style, with a machine gun. Gentlemen, let us only hope that he accumulates a large dump of ammunition and, that he learns to hit the target. Laughter and applause follows. Churchill's theme was also expounded by an Etonian contemporary of Randolph's, the second Lord Birkenhead, who was there alone. His father, the first Lord Birkenhead, former Lord Chancellor and Randolph's godfather and great exemplar, had died of drink some 2 years earlier. The young lord then proposed a toast to Randolph's health and to his rise to fame. In its way, this rise had already been spectacular. Randolph was already established as a journalist, social figure, and celebrity. He had written for Lord Beaverbrook, lectured across America, and could not wait to enter Parliament. Like most of the guests gathered in his honor, Randolph took it for granted that his goal in life, There are children howling on the stairs outside. It echoes. My first reaction was to be slightly annoyed, but then I thought, oh, you know how exciting that is as a child when you get into like an echoey place? It is a thrill. Sometimes as an adult, it's still a thrill. Okay. Like most of the guests gathered in his honor, Randolph took it for granted that his goal in life was the great pursuit of power and political success. Referring to the evening many years later, he ruefully admitted that, had anyone told me I wouldn't soon be in the House of Commons by the time I was 21 or soon afterwards, I would have thought them absolutely too ridiculous for words. Pitt the younger held office at 23 and was Prime Minister at 25, and I saw no reason why I should not do the same. Prime Minister at 25? That's a joke. You know any 25-year-old men? That's the last person I want the leader of a country. I don't think their frontal lobes are even fully developed yet. Okay. This extraordinary self-confidence had originated with Winston, who had been grooming and preparing Randolph for politics since childhood, the way a thoroughbred is prepared for the Derby. Politics is like prostitution and piano playing, he once remarked. The earlier you start, the better. Throughout his adult life, Winston Churchill had been obsessed with the pursuit and exercise of political power. The thought of this power being magically passed from certain fathers to their sons was an idea that touched on one of the profoundest and in many ways the most mysterious elements within his extremely complex nature. If ghosts could dine, the place of honor at that long oval table at Claridge's that night would have been set aside for a small, dynamic man with prominent blue eyes and a very large mustache, Churchill's own father, Lord Randolph Churchill, after whom he had named his son. Lord Randolph's life was one of great tragedies and cautionary tales of Victorian politics. After a charmed ascent to the position of Chancellor of the Exchequer by the age of 36, the great orator, arrogantly power-mad as the only son of a Victorian duke could be, had resigned from Lord Salisbury's government in 1886 in an ill-judged bid for the succession. He died, embittered and insane, some 9 years later at the age of 45. One might have thought that such an occurrence was quite enough to scare off any son from politics forever. Yet Winston had inherited his father's grand obsession. There were already coincidences in their two careers. By the evening of Randolph's birthday dinner, Winston Churchill had occupied in succession the same two offices of state, Secretary of State for the Colonies and Chancellor of the Exchequer, that his father had held before his fall. Also, at the time of the party, Churchill was also in the midst of a political crisis, the most prolonged of his life, which would keep him firmly out of office until war began in 1939. To most of his fellow politicians, Winston seemed politically played out. One of his favorite guests that night, his friend Lord Beaverbrook, would soon describe him as a busted flush. He was out of power, relatively hard up, and at odds with the conservative hierarchy. He was still feared, still potent in debate, but he was also haunted by the possibility that some unseen destiny had trapped him in the very pattern that had destroyed his father, Lord Randolph. Although he was a firm agnostic, Churchill had long believed in destiny. This belief gave purpose to his existence, had saved him from death, so he claimed, in countless times of danger, and had kept his unrelenting ego high above the dross of hopeless, doomed humanity. There were rare moments when he felt his destiny was an actual presence. "Over me beat unseen wings" was how he would describe the all-important stroke of luck that kept him out of Stanley Baldwin's government 3 years later. Churchill's sense of destiny included members of his family, dead as well as living, and strengthened his identification with his father and his son. Asquith's daughter, Lady Violet Bonham Carter, Bonham Carter, who knew him well, and had, in fact, been in love with him many years before, wrote of his obsession with his family and how its members held pride of place within the citadel of his heart, to the exclusion of all others. For his closest family, this was a fact of life, and also something of a burden. This was particularly true for stylish Clementine, who at 47 still managed to appear considerably more than 10 years younger than her bald and portly husband. It is unlikely she was deeply hurt at missing out on her son's 21st birthday dinner. Down to earth by nature, she must have felt the evening's theme a touch absurd, and probably a little vulgar. She would also almost certainly have agreed with most of what Bruce Lockhart wrote about Randolph in his diary, but her disapproval never had much effect upon her husband's princeling. Clementine had built a personal survival route against her husband's dominating presence. Since their marriage 24 years earlier, she had sacrificed herself upon the altar of his greatness. She had loved him, mothered him, with the children firmly taking second place, shared in his triumphs, and seen him through his bouts of deep depression and aggressive rage when he was thwarted. She had accepted his belief that destiny had marked him for greatness, and against her own somewhat puritanical nature, had endured his compulsive taste for extravagance and luxury, armies of servants, silk underwear, cigars, extremely good champagne, and the company of the very rich. She had learned to live with his elephantine ego, tolerate his more outlandish friends, accept his limitless capacity for work, and understand his passionate desire for power. If Clementine became neurotic and felt the need for prolonged periods away from him, it was not surprising. More seriously at risk were the two elder daughters, 22-year-old Diana and her 17-year-old sister, Sarah, who, as females, were also excluded from their brother's party and from the sacred bond between son and father. The baby of the family, 9-year-old Mary, safely home in bed, was to be protected by her youth from many of the influences that were to dislocate the lives of her siblings in the years ahead. All the Churchill girls were pretty, with the auburn hair and blue eyes of their mother, but Diana had inherited nothing of her father's toughness. She was nervous and petite, like a little fairy, Sarah said, and her extreme self-consciousness made her particularly vulnerable. Sarah was tougher than her sister, with a touch of glamour that her sister lacked. She was charming, extroverted, and, like her father and her brother, tended to be intensely obstinate once she had made her mind up. Hence her family nickname, Mule. Outwardly, this gave her all the signs of a born survivor, but she shared Randolph's self-destructive streak. She, too, would finally fall victim to the force that drove her father forward. Some of the extended family appeared immune to this strange family trait. Winston's younger brother, Jack, was present at the party, together with Jack's eldest son, Randolph's cousin, Johnny. A tall, good-looking man with a mustache. Jack was a city stockbroker. Kind, unintellectual, easygoing, Jack worshipped his elder brother for qualities he notably lacked himself. Like his son, Johnny, whose chief interest lay in acrobatics, pretty girls, and fresco painting, Jack was essentially a private person. Whatever demons Brother Winston had inherited from Lord Randolph had passed him by entirely, leaving him immune to the magnetic pull of politics. Another guest at Claridge's that night was also like a brother to Winston Churchill. Churchill treated him with notable respect, placing him directly opposite him at table. He was a small man with a thin mustache, a drooping eye, and the mark of worldly disappointment on his sallow face. This was Churchill's noble cousin, Charles Richard John Spencer Churchill, sonny to his intimates, the 9th Duke of Marlborough, to the world at large. Churchill revered him as the head of his all-important family. He also loved him, warts and all, and described him as my oldest and dearest friend. Both had inherited their share of the depressive Churchill temperament, and both, in their early years, had shared a series of catastrophes and scandals that shook the family. All of these influences and far-off family disasters had strengthened Winston for the pursuit of power and inspired him for a life of action. Sonny Marlborough, however, had been left profoundly scarred. He was introverted, bitter, and suspicious of anyone outside the family. Winston he loved, but he was not the sort of man to warm to Randolph. With all the speeches and the port and the after-dinner conversation, it was midnight before Randolph's birthday party ended, and as son and father stood in the foyer of that grand hotel, bidding their guests good night, they could congratulate themselves upon a most successful evening. Neither could possibly have suspected that nothing would turn out as the party had suggested. Churchill's life was not drawing to its close. His years of glory still lay ahead of him, while Randolph's was already over. For that destiny in which Churchill believed was mysterious. It had its origins within the lives and legends of his ancestors. It was indissolubly linked with the tragic figure of his father, who was to haunt him all his life. It would bring him fame beyond the dreams of immortality, but it would also bring him secret anguish and destroy the lives of several who were closest to him. And, contrary to his dearest wishes, it would leave him no successors. Behind this monolithic figure lies a hidden story. It is a stranger story than the legends and the history books admit, and it ends, as it begins, within that citadel of Churchill's heart, his family. Ooh. Okay, that is the first chapter of The Private Lives of Winston Churchill. I'm just going to pause, and then I'm going to grab another book, and we can read another chapter of something else. Okay, this is Matriarch by Anne Edwards, Queen Mary and the House of Windsor. So this is about Queen Mary, who was the wife of King George V, who was the mother of King Edward. What number was he? The one who abdicated. And then so Edward the Seventh, Edward the Eighth, wasn't it? And then King George VI, who was the father of Queen Elizabeth. So this is Queen Elizabeth's grandmother. This is the grandmother that Princess Margaret was saying we couldn't stand her. She wasn't even royal. We were royal. Oh, there she is on the back. I love how even into the 50s, she was still dressing so Edwardian. She really, I don't know. I'm interested in her. So this is the one that her own granddaughter was like, she's not royal. We are. All right. Matriarch. The first chapter is entitled, the first part is entitled When Grandmama Was Queen. And it begins with, I live with bread like you, feel want, taste grief, need friends. Subjected thus, how can you say I am a king? Shakespeare, King Richard II, Act 3, Scene 3. The rumors were correct. The summons to Balmoral Castle by Her Majesty Queen Victoria could be interpreted only one way. Princess May of Teck was being considered as a suitable wife for Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence and Avondale, known as Prince Eddie and second heir to the British throne. Even to contemplate the possibility of one day becoming Queen Consort of England was a heady experience for the 24-year-old woman. The fact that Prince Eddie was one of her less endearing Wales cousins, and that he had never taken the slightest interest in her, was no deterrent. Royalty was a profession, and she was being given a chance to audition for its most highly coveted role. November 4, 1981, was blustery cold, and London a hard metallic gray. Princess May's parents, the Duke and Duchess of Teck, drove with her and the eldest of her 3 brothers, Prince Adolphus Dolly, from their home, White Lodge, Richmond, to see her safely aboard the train at Euston Station for Aberdeen. At first glimpse, the young woman would not have been called beautiful. A touch of merriment gleamed in her deeply set, clear china blue eyes, and when amused, her softly curved mouth twitched into a fleeting smile. Yet little diminished the gravity of Princess May's expression. I always have to be so careful not to laugh, she once confided to a friend, because you see, I have such a vulgar laugh. There's a note. Oh, this is the friend that she was writing this to, Mabel, Countess of Airlie, from 1866 to died in 1956, Queen Mary's lady-in-waiting for over 50 years. Princess May's natural beauty was easy to overlook, for she combed her shiny, wheat-colored hair into an unflattering style, too high and tight at the sides, and with a frizzled, low fringe in the front that had prompted the Queen to remark that Princess May resembled nothing so much as a poodle with her hair so low on her forehead. Nonetheless, the style was distinctive, adding inches to her height. She was 5 foot 6 inches tall, and giving her a statuesque elegance, an impression she much enjoyed and was to nurture throughout her life. The young woman sat between her slim, mustached brother and her aristocratic, if foppish-looking father in the front seat. The entire rear seat of the luxurious carriage was occupied by her flamboyant mother, Princess Mary Adelaide, Duchess of Teck, who, though handsome of face and possessing a charismatic personality, was a woman of extraordinary girth, the most conservative estimate of her weight having been put at 17 stone, which is 238 pounds. Fortunately, Princess Adelaide was tall and carried herself well. She also dressed in exquisite taste and had the same startling blue eyes that she had bequeathed to her daughter. Fat Mary, the people called her, though affectionately. She had always been popular because of her irrepressible high spirits and her accessibility at a time when the widowed queen so seldom appeared in public, and on those rare occasions was to be seen swathed in black mourning clothes. Even now, as she stifled her injured pride at not being invited by her cousin, the Queen, to accompany Princess May and Prince Dolly to Balmoral, Princess Mary Adelaide smiled broadly, chatted merrily away, leaned out a window, exposing her face to the raw winter day, and enthusiastically raised a pudgy hand to people on the streets who had recognized and waved at her, craning their heads to get a good look at her stylish hat and new furs. There's a note. Princess Mary Adelaide replied to Queen Victoria's summons, Only a line not to keep the messenger too long waiting, to thank you for your very kind letter, and to say with what joy my children will obey your gracious and more than kind summons, though I must add that I feel inclined to be rather envious, and not a little jealous at being left out in the cold, and not invited to accompany them, albeit very much gratified at your most kind wish to have them with you for a little while. She really got that in there, didn't she? Okay, exposing exposing her, blah, 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 blah. Princess Mary Adelaide had a passion for beautiful clothes, and, as the superlative quality and lavish detail of her daughter's traveling outfit revealed, had passed on this extravagance to Princess May. Otherwise more conservative than her mother, Princess May did enjoy being well dressed. The price of Princess Mary Adelaide's hat would have been a fortune to the countless men who had lost their jobs in the tottering economy, yet, ironically, the majority of London's masses of poor did not begrudge the aristocracy their finery. Anarchists and revolutionaries existed, but the greater segment of the poor looked to the royal family for the color and pageantry missing from their own drab lives. Princess Mary Adelaide, with her ornate jewels and her fine feathers and opulent furs, had become a pet of the public, a substitute, perhaps, for the mourning queen. Until the invitation had come from Balmoral, Princess May had not expected more than marriage to a sensible man of mediocre means and acceptable rank. She had been only too aware that among the royal houses of Europe a marriage between herself and one of their princes would have been deemed a misalliance because of her own father, Prince Franz, Duke of Teck, being the son of a morganatic marriage. There's a note. The Duke of Teck's father had been heir apparent to the throne of Württemberg, a state in southwest Germany, with Stuttgart as its capital. His rights to the succession were forfeited in 1835 when he married the Hungarian Countess Reddy. The marriage, because of the Countess's lower rank, was unconstitutional in Württemberg. Prince Franz thus had no claim in the succession. Countess Reddy was trampled to death by a squadron of cavalry led by her husband, her mount having bolted while she watched maneuvers when Prince Franz was 4 years old. How terribly sad. Oh. To add to this difficult situation, the Duke of Teck was penniless, his wife impossibly extravagant, and the family had more than once barely sidestepped the bailiffs. In fact, Princess May's parents had often been the butt of sharp comment among royalty and the aristocracy. Before their marriage, the Duke of Teck, who loved the good life, had been living on his meager military pay. And an occasional handout from the Austrian emperor. Though oversized, as well as being 4 years older than he, Princess Mary Adelaide was the impoverished duke's greatest hope come true. Not until after the wedding did he learn that his bride was as penniless as he. Queen Victoria had arranged for the Tecks to live in the south wing of Kensington Palace, where she had been brought up as a girl. On the stroke of midnight, on May 26, 1867, in the same room and bed where the Queen had been born, Princess Mary Adelaide gave birth to a daughter, christened Victoria, Mary, Augusta, Louisa, Olga, Pauline, Claudine, Agnes, but always called May by her parents and family because of the month in which she was born. When the new baby was 1 month old, Queen Victoria made a rare expedition to London to see her sons, the Prince of Wales's firstborn daughter, Princess Louise, whom she found puny and pigeon-breasted. After leaving Marlborough House, the Prince of Wales's home, the Queen headed westward in an open carriage and four through the densely crowded park to see dear Mary Teck. It seems strange, she wrote in her journal, to drive into the old courtyard and to get out at the door, the very knockers of which were very old friends. My dear old home, how many memories it evoked, walking through the well-known rooms. At the top of the house, in the room that had heard her own first lusty cries, the Queen saw Princess May and deemed her a very fine child, with quantities of hair brushed up into a curl on top of its head. In the next 7 years, Princess May was to have 3 brothers, the eldest being Prince Adolphus. The Tecks were always in humiliating debt. In 1883, when Princess May was 16, they were in such short street, with bailiffs set to seize their possessions, that to escape their creditors they had run off to Florence. There they had fell upon the charity of relations and friends. Only the Queen's grace permitted them to return to England 2 years later to live modestly at White Lodge in Richmond Park. Though not one of the Crown's most luxurious houses, White Lodge had an historic past. On a table in the study of this house, Lord Nelson had dipped his finger in a glass of port and sketched his plan for the Battle of Trafalgar. Edward, Prince of Wales, had been established at White Lodge when he was 17, under conditions of strict security so that he might be away from the world and lose himself entirely to study. The Prince of Wales was always to think of the house as a prison, and his time spent there a sentence. But the Tex had found it a prestigious home, and Princess Mary Adelaide, with her great flair for decoration, had added much to its charm, pretentious and overly elaborate though her additions might have been. What saved the Teck family from ruin during Princess May's youth was her mother's keen ability to wheedle the Queen into advancing her large sums of money. But the importuning on the crown had not made the family popular with their royal relations. Princess May was never to forget the circumstances of her forced exile in Florence, and she was determined to turn this embarrassing period to her own advantage. Learning German and studying art. At 19, she had made an unsuccessful London debut, for no beau appeared on the scene. Aware that her marriage prospects were grim, and being a practical young woman, Princess May had lived quietly with her family at the understaffed White Lodge, assisting her mother with her household accounts and correspondence, giving much time to the London Needlework Guild, and reading 6 hours daily under the tutelage of Madame Bricca, a tactless Alsatian woman with radical good brains. Yet here she was on her way to Balmoral Castle with the possibility of becoming betrothed to the second heir to the British throne. The long ride to Euston Station could well have afforded Princess May time to think of how she, the most unlikely of all princesses, was being considered. She knew Prince Eddie had become a serious problem to his parents, the Prince and Princess of Wales, and to his grandmother, the Queen. He had always been slow and immature, unable to grasp most situations, awkward in all sports except shooting, and frail in health. And, however steadfastly Princess May refused to consider it true, scandal was attached to his name. In 1889, a police raid on a male brothel at 19 Cleveland Street, not far from Euston Station, had spawned much private speculation about Prince Eddie's proclivities. The establishment catered to titled and wealthy homosexuals, and during that raid it was alleged that Prince Eddie's close friend, Lord Arthur Somerset, had been found with a young man. A warrant was issued in connection with these offences, but Lord Arthur, known in court circles as Podge, was able to flee the country before it could be served. No proof was ever presented that Prince Eddie had been with Podge at the brothel. However, there was never any official denial to allay public suspicions that the police had concealed evidence, an accusation broadly hinted at in the press. The prince was a natural candidate for public conjecture because of the gossip and rumor that had steadily grown since his youth. Even his devoted mother, Alexandra, Princess of Wales, was aware of her elder son's shortcomings and did nothing to hide them. In 1883, when he was 19, the princess had written to her son's childhood tutor, the Reverend John Dalton, "We are neither of us blind to his faults." And to her mother-in-law, the Queen, she wrote a short time later, "Eddie is a very good boy at heart, though perhaps he is a little slow and dawdly, which I always attribute to his having grown so fast." Princess May had known Prince Eddie since childhood, and her memory of her cousin was not pleasant. In childhood he had bullied her, and she had thought him dull-witted, and had far preferred the company of his younger brother, Georgie. Boorish though he had been and still might be, Prince Eddie would one day be king, and if her stay at Balmoral proved successful, she would be queen. She had accepted the idea quite easily. The power, glory, and riches that came with the title could have been one reason, but the status such a marriage would bring her family was a great consideration. The Tex had always been the poor royal relations, and her mother, whom she loved dearly, had been made to feel this all too frequently. Even she had been treated shabbily by her English relations at times. Under such circumstances, it would have been difficult for Princess May to refuse the most brilliant position in the realm, to become successively Duchess of Clarence and Avondale, Princess of Wales, and ultimately Queen Consort of England, Timmy, this is the last place you need to be. Her mother stepped down from the carriage with surprising grace and led the way through the harsh wind to the platform where she rendered her last-minute instructions. Remember, Aunt Queen can't abide people who sleep late. Princess Mary Adelaide then kissed her daughter on the cheek. You get out of here. No. You get out of here. Nope. You're not going to come here and chew on cords. Princess Mary Adelaide then kissed her daughter on the cheek and hurried her 2 children into the carriage bearing the royal crest. Once they were situated, she stood and implanted upon the platform, dwarfing all else about her, one hand holding her boldly feathered hat, the other waving in the sharp wind as her daughter's train steamed out of the station and into the cold, gray distance. At what moment in his childhood Prince Eddie realized that one day he was going to be king is hard to know. Years later, his future great-grandnephew, Charles, Prince of Wales, heir apparent to the throne. And there's a note that says, Charles, Prince of Wales, born 1948, Queen Mary's great-grandson. Was to say the knowledge was something that dawns on you in the most ghastly, inexorable sense. Slowly you get the idea that you have a certain duty and responsibility. Prince Eddie, at 26, was aware of his future, but either he could not or did not want to grasp what he had to live up to in order to fulfill it. Prince Eddie had been born January 8, 1864, 2 months premature, and without preparations or a nurse in attendance. This had caused a furor, since the duty of the Home Secretary was to be present at the birth of those in direct succession to the throne. From infancy, the prince had been blighted with poor health. As he matured, his lack of character and his inordinate slowness were cause for greater concern. From birth, he bore a hearing deficiency, a problem which accounted for his learning disability. Since his mother was extraordinarily sensitive about it, suffering this same handicap, she was not told, and the condition was never medically treated. Prince Eddie was inclined to dark moods, and though his manners were correct, he was aloof and awkward, suffered a nervous tic, and possessed a piercing, unpleasant, high-pitched voice. Let me just see how long the chapter is. Oh, it's not so bad. His younger brother, Prince George, had quite another personality. Though only 17 months separated them, Prince George was full of high spirits and eminently more attractive and adept at most things. The princes were to be seen side by side throughout their youth. Their parents, he's chewing a receipt. Your face is so funny. Eminently. Their parents apparently believed that with their close association, the older brother might eventually take on the younger's characteristics, and hoped that the public would associate Prince Eddie with Prince George's bright affability. The royal brothers were schooled together until their mid-teens. Then, in a move that drew strongly adverse comment in Parliament, at 14 and 15 respectively, they were sent as cadets. Get that back. They were sent as cadets. Where am I? They were sent as cadets on a 3-year world cruise aboard both HMS Britannia and HMS something I can't read. Chaperoned by the Reverend John Dalton, whose duty was to report their activities to their parents. By the end of the cruise, expectations were that Prince Eddie might have matured into a more personable and knowledgeable young man. Instead, while Prince George learned the sea and navigation, his elder brother absorbed little, except, according to Mr. Dalton, things of a dissolute nature, referring to the young man's liking for alcohol and his penchant for escaping Mr. Dalton's careful guard to frequent seaside dives while in port with young ruffians of poor reputation. Okay, hold on. Timmy's stuck. I gotta get him down. Okay, I had to turn on the light and light the candle because I don't know if you noticed, but we lost the light as we were reading. Okay, it's getting dark outside. On returning from their world travels and after being away from the family for a painfully long time, the brothers were once again sent abroad, this time to Switzerland for 6 months to learn French. Such long separations in a family whose mother was almost incestuously close to her sons, and to whom partings had invariably brought on the most terrible scenes of despair, must have been difficult for the young princess. An unusually close relationship existed between them. On Prince George's part, the responsibility for his brother and attendant lack of privacy had a sobering and maturing influence. When they were finally forced to go their independent ways, Prince Eddie to Cambridge to further his education, and Prince George to pursue his naval career on HMS Canada and the Royal Navy's West Indian and North American Squadron, the older brother wrote, "My dear George, so we are at last separated for the first time, and I can't tell you how strange it seems to be without you, and how much I miss you in everything all day long." While at Cambridge, Prince Eddie's tutor was a James Kenneth Stephen. It says a cousin of Virginia Woolf. A young man, 12 years his student's senior, who, according to his colleagues, was a scholar with cultivated taste. Timmy, stop. Stop that. With cultivated taste. And a natural bent towards dainty and exquisite language. The relationship between tutor and pupil was extremely close, hardly surprising given Prince Eddie's lifelong dependence upon his brother and his position, which disallowed the usual friendships of university life. After 2 years at Cambridge, he was gazetted to the 10th Hussars, but the relationship with Stephen did not end, and they continued a frequent and intimate correspondence. I don't know, I feel like she's kind of hinting that there's a little bit of something between them. By the time Prince Eddie left Cambridge in 1885, he became the subject of intense family concern and public censure. I'm just going to finish this paragraph, and then, as you can see, the family is starting to apparently want attention. Okay, from the time Prince Eddie left Cambridge in 1885, he became the subject of intense family concern and public censure. There were persistent and worried exchanges that touched upon Eddie's dissipations. What these might be was never spelled out, if indeed they were homosexual indiscretions. The prince at least seemed to be attracted to women. To his parents' displeasure and the Queen's disapproval, he was reported in and out of love with a series of unsuitable ladies with alarming speed. All right, let's stop there because, like I said, everyone's getting into something, and so we'll have to come back to this. But, I mean, that's a little taste, and we actually have another book about the Tsar and Tsarina. So at some point, maybe I'll do this again with like another set of books, and then we can sort of do a little pick and choose. All right. Thank you so much for being with me. I will see you soon. And tomorrow, don't forget, it's Silver Screen Sunday. So I will see you for that. And I think you're really going to like the movie that I've chosen. It's great. Okay. See you soon. Bye-bye.